Good evening and welcome everyone to this meeting of the Western Area Planning Committee. I'm Clive Hooker, I'm chairman of this planning committee. The members joining me this evening are councillors Adrian Abbs, Phil Barnett, Jeff Cant, Hilary Cole, Caroline Culver, Dennis Bennyworth, Tony Vickers, our vice chairman, and James Cole. The following officers are in attendance to support the meeting this evening, and they are Simon Till and Maisie Asawa. They are our planning officers. I have Andrew Giles, our tree officer, Gareth Ryman, our ecologist, Kim Mayer is the committee's legal advisor this evening, and Jenny Legg will act as our clerk. I'm also assisted by Kevin Griffin, who will be the Zoom host for the rest of the evening. I'll now ask Mrs. Legg to remind us all of how we conduct ourselves with regards to council Zoom meetings. Mrs. Legg, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening. Standard Zoom reminders will be shared on screen shortly. In addition to those points, if it becomes necessary for any members to telephone into the meeting, they won't be able to signal to speak. Therefore, once everyone who has raised a Zoom hand has spoken, I will ask the chairman to invite anyone who is joined by telephone to speak in order. Voting on the planning applications will take place via a named vote. Members will be asked in turn by the legal advisor how they wish to vote by stating they are for or against the proposal, or if they wish to abstain. Please remember to unmute yourself when voting. Any other votes will be conducted via a show of actual hands during the meeting. Unless the committee asks for the vote to be recorded, the outcome of the named vote will not appear in the minutes, so anyone wishing their vote to be recorded must indicate this before the vote is taken. If we need to adjourn the meeting at any point, the chairman will adjourn and advise the committee of the revised time and date of the meeting. If it is a short adjournment, you will be able to rejoin the Zoom meeting, otherwise a fresh appointment will be sent out. Do members have any questions about the way in which the meeting will be conducted before we proceed?
No, we all seem quite clear. Thank you very much, Mrs. Legg. We now move on to our agenda, item 1. Any apologies, please, Mrs. Legg?
Yes, Chairman, we have apologies from Councillor Wollaston, and he will be substituted for by Councillor James Cole. Thank you. Welcome, Councillor Cole. Item 2 on the agenda is to approve the minutes held on the 4th and the 11th of November. The minutes of the 25th of November meeting will be available at our next Western Area Planning meeting, which I think is scheduled for January the 13th. The reason is that our officers are confirming the additional conditions requested by the members of this committee at that meeting on the 25th of November. So members, you've had a chance to look at the minutes. I'll deal with those first of the 4th of November. Do you have any observations of those minutes that you'd like to bring to my attention? Please put your hand up. No, I don't see any. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chairman. The blue hand's raised. Yeah, page 9 of the minutes under point 24, the final bullet point about the noise survey being conducted between 3 AM and 7 AM. It says this would be challenging for planning enforcement to check. I'd be grateful if Secretariat for the meeting could go back and check what was actually said, because I think it was more likely that it was said that that was a strange time of day to do a survey, because it would have given a limited result.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Legg.
Thank you for that observation. Mrs. Legg, you're quite happy with that? You've got that noted?
Yeah, I'll go back and check.
Members, Councillor Abbs, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm not sure it's directly related to the minutes, but I received correspondence from, I think it was the clerk, after the meeting, saying that the dB level that we set in the meeting was somehow misinterpreted. I'm now struggling to see, did anything actually change? Is my question, and if so, so I think I've received some correspondence, and I'm not sure it matches what I'm looking at here, but this is what we agreed as far as I can tell. So this stands, correct?
Thank you. I'll ask Mrs. Mayer in terms of the legal position and Mrs. Legg if it's as recorded, and this is conversation and communication obviously that's gone outside of this meeting, how we stand on noting that, as whether it's a correction or just a note. Can somebody advise me, please?
I'm not familiar. I'm not aware of the email. Jenny, was it from you?
No, it wasn't. Don't know.
Can't assist.
Okay, I can forward it to yourself later on, Kim. But for now,
we'll note it
take
and see if it needs to be included. But thank you for that, Councillor Abs. No more observations? No more hands up. Councillor Abs, if you put your hand down, please. Thank you. Can I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Councillor Vickers, and a second, Councillor Bennyworth. Thank you. All those in favour, if you just raise your hands, please. Councillor Cant, lovely, lovely. Councillor Cole wasn't there, that's fine. So, Mrs. Mayor, I think we'll agree that those minutes have been approved and I will sign them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, members, now we move on to the meeting that was held on the 11th of November. Same format. Do you have any observations of those minutes, please? No, no hands gone up. That's good. So if I could have a proposer for those minutes, please. Councillor Cole, and a second. Councillor Vickers. Thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That's all. That's all done. Thank you. Those minutes are approved, and I will sign those.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Mayor. Okay, now we move on to item 3 of the agenda: declarations of interest. Mrs. Legg. Oh, you're ready to record? Because we will have some. I've got Councillor Cole first, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been lobbied on this agenda item 4.1.
Thank you. Councillor Culver.
Same.
Thank you. Councillor Vickers.
Same, but also my wife and I are personal friends of Mr. Handy and his wife, who's the applicant's tree advisor, but I don't believe we're that close to a conflict, serious conflict, that is.
Thank you. Councillor Abs.
yes, lobbied like everybody else.
Thank you. Councillor Cole.
Yes, I have to declare a personal interest in this item. By virtue both of the fact that I've been lobbied by the parish council and the applicant, and of course of the applications within the Hungerford and Kimpray ward. But any interest is personal, not prejudicial, it's not a disclosable pecuniary interest.
Thank you. Councillor Bennyworth, you had your hand up. You can't put a blue hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can ditto Councillor Cole,
Yes.
and yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barnett, I know you're on your phone. You may not be able to put a hand up, but if you do need to put your hand up, then I'll try and keep an eye out for you. Do you have to declare an interest on this?
Yeah, the same as that everybody else on 4.1 been lobbied. Thank you, Chairman.
And I will concur that I also have been lobbied on this. Councillor Cant, thank you.
The same as everyone else. I think we've all been lobbied.
Thank you. So that's noted, Mrs. Legg.
Yep.
Right. We now move on to the business of the evening, item 4 on the agenda. This is planning applications. We have one application this evening, that is application number 20/02322. This is a full planning application, and it's for the erection of 2 sheds for housing cattle at Bones Farm, Bones Lane at Emborn. For the benefit of those watching online and in the waiting room ready to join us, I'll briefly outline the format of the application this evening. The officers will present the application to the committee. The drawings, site plans and any deemed relevant information and materials submitted on the planning file will be shown as part of that presentation. I will then invite the clerk to read out the 500-word submission from the following groups and in this order. Firstly will be the parish council, then any submission from the objectors, then the supporters, then the applicant. And on the conclusion of each of those 4 5-word submissions, I'll ask members if they have any questions of clarification on that submission. If they have, the attendees will be invited into the meeting to answer those questions. If they do not have any questions, the attendees will not be invited into the meeting. On conclusion of answering any questions, the attendees will be invited to move back into the waiting room. Following that, I will invite the ward member to speak. They will have 5 minutes to present their case. Members may then, on conclusion of their presentation, ask questions of clarifications of that member. The committee members will then have the opportunity to ask questions of the clarification of the officers' presentations. Following that, the committee will then debate the application and a vote will be made on the decision. So members, we now move on to that application. That is the application at Bones Farm for the erection of 2 sheds for housing cattle. And this has come to committee this evening due to a call in from a ward member. And I have the planning officer, Mr. Masawa, to present this application. Mr. Masawa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just share my screen. Can everyone see it okay?
That's very good, thank you.
Thank you. Once again, good evening, everyone. Firstly, I would say we've got an update sheet provided today, which includes a plan that shows the alternative sites considered by officers and referred to in the committee report. That was omitted in the plans pack, so that's been added to that. As introduced by the chairman, members, the application before you this evening seeks full planning permission for erection of 2 sheds for housing cattle during winter at Bones Farm in Enbon. The application is recommended by officers for refusal as set out in section 8 of the report. It has been called into committee by the ward member. There are 14 letters of support from local residents, and also there's support from the local parish council. There are consultation objections from the council's tree officer and the council's ecology officer, as well as the Buckinghamshire, Berkshire and Oxfordshire Wildlife Trust. The council's tree officer and ecology officer are available today to answer any questions of a technical nature that members may wish to ask. The barns will be located within the northeast quarter of Little Copse, as shown on the plan, which is a historic woodland with ancient woodland indicators. The site is located in flood zone 1. The next map shows the site constraints and surroundings. The grade 2 listed farmhouse can be seen to the west, which is a light greenish color. The site, Little Copse that is designated a local wildlife site. On this map, you can also see the nearest designated ancient woodland at Reading Copse, which is to the north east, which is outlined in green. Reading Copse is also designated a local wildlife site. The proposed barns are shown on the proposed site layout plan. The combined floor area of the proposed buildings is 744 square meters, and the maximum height of each building is 6.18 meters. The buildings are designed with a framework of painted steel, dual sloped roofs with natural grey corrugated cement fiber. The design of the barns is considered acceptable by officers and in keeping with the functional cattle building. There would be some level of some leveling of the site to allow the erecting of the sheds and putting down the hardcore within the area. Also proposed is an area of 0.18 hectare of native planting to the east of the woodland, as shown on the plan. Bones Farm is a 256-acre grassland farm, of which approximately 35 acres is ancient or semi-natural woodland. The farm business is discussed at paragraph 6.7 to 6.10 of the committee report. The existing head is housed during the winter in a converted hay barn on the western edge of the farm, which is a 2-mile round trip from the Bombs farmyard. Officers acknowledge and support the identified need and justification for the buildings within the farm and closer to the farmyard as a means of supporting the rural enterprise. There are no other buildings available on the site. Buildings in other uses are referred to at paragraphs 6.11 of the committee report. The following photographs show the site access to the barn. So we are on Bombs Lane at this point from the south, looking towards the site. And you can see the site access. This is the site access looking in from the north. This is a view of the proposed development site, which you can see just beyond the barn to your left. And this is taken from within the site. And this is the site location and the woodland behind. Again, another angle of the site. Another angle of the site itself with the woodland behind. On this, you can see the current use of the site as well as the existing ditch and woodland beyond. The existing ditch separates the existing farmyard and what is the woodland. Another shot of the site, which is to your right on the screen. Another shot of the existing drainage ditch. And again, the existing ditch and the site is to the left of the photo. This photograph shows a view of the area for proposed planting, and this is looking east. Again, another view from within the site looking north. Officers consider that the development as submitted would have a significant impact on a historic woodland with ancient woodland indicators and also designated a local wildlife site. Policy CS18 of the core strategy requires the retention of valued green infrastructure, which contribute to the character of the landscape and the area. The NPPF states that planning permission should be refused for development resulting in the loss of aged or veteran trees unless the need for and benefits of the development in that location clearly outweigh the loss. Officers consider that the benefits of the development would not outweigh the woodland value, which could be lost permanently. Officers also consider that this development can be reasonably carried out elsewhere within the agricultural holding. Policy CS17 of the core strategy also states that biodiversity and geodiversity assets across West Berkshire will be conserved and enhanced. Harm to biodiversity and geodiversity has been identified within the proposed development, and as indicated in the consultation responses, inadequate mitigation is provided. As such, the officers' views is that there is a high risk of significant impacts to the existing biodiversity habitat from the proposed development being located within the woodland. The NPPF also requires significant impact on biodiversity to be avoided in the first instance through locating development elsewhere. Officers consider that the development can be carried out elsewhere on the site, and officers have previously agreed an alternative location on the previous refused application, which was refused in August this year. A potential site appraisal has been submitted, which you can see on the screen, and this outlines that the visual, noise, odor, and ecological impacts of alternative sites 1 and 2. As you can see, hopefully you can see my cursor. This is potential site 1 and potential site 2, and these are referred to in the report. As indicated, officers consider these likely impacts on the 2 alternative sites on the previous application and concluded that site 2 would be the most preferable and would be one that officers would be minded to recommend approval in the event that the development was relocated to site 2. Overall, Mr. Chairman, to conclude, whilst officers acknowledge the need for the barns and having suggested an alternative site that would be recommended for approval, the proposal before you this evening will not accord with the development plan as outlined, taking into account also other material consideration as set out in the committee report, including the impact on trees, the trees to be retained within the woodland, local wildlife habitat. As such, Mr. Chairman, the proposal is not supported by officers. Just to conclude, I've got the additional photos of the potential alternative site 2. This is looking north. You can see the location there. There's some power lines which are shown on the plan. Again, the site. This is a view from within the site, or the farmyard rather, looking south, and the alternative site is this here. And this is another view of that paddock from the site access onto the farmyard. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Merswa. Before you go, have you any observations on your update sheet that you'd like to bring to the attention of the members?
Just one, Mr. Chairman, which it's the we've added the alternative sites plan, which you've just seen on the slides. That wasn't included in the proposed plans that are in your pack.
That's the update sheet. Thank you. No more than that. Thank you very much. We now move on to the submissions that have come from the public. And Mrs. Legg, could you read the first one out, please? And this is from Emborne Parish Council.
Yes, Chairman. I shall just share screen for you. As you say, this is Emborne Parish Council. Hopefully that's large enough for everybody. Emborne Parish Council strongly supported this very well-designed planning application at its special planning meeting on Monday, 2nd of November 2020, noting widespread resident support. The tree officer has visited the site and confirmed no existing trees will be damaged and planned new woodland and hedgerow planting is welcomed. The proposed development links Little Copse with Reddings Copse, which, unlike Little Copse, is designated ancient woodland, thus creating a linked landscape promoting increasing biodiversity. The arboricultural report with recommendations incorporated in the plan strengthens woodland protections and creates a sheltered area behind the barns for undisturbed exploitation by wildlife. The nearby mature over 100 years old oaks within the local wildlife site, LWS, bordering the proposed development area, show no sign of competition for light from that direction for well beyond the 20 years conjectured elsewhere, so woodland absence. The photo on page 16, public document pack photographs, shows a typical woodland edge growth pattern. The foreground shows the area for development is not woodland, and the Thames Valley Environmental Records Centre, DVERC, survey in 2004, Design and Access Statement DAS Appendix 5, suggested that area could be removed from LWS designation as it was not woodland. Photographs presented of aerial views taken in 2010 and 2018, therefore, do not show woodland, and the shot from 1999 is of even less quality. The pond was a short-lived feature which dried out naturally. The shot on page 8 showing the proposed barns in their setting is copied from plate 4 of the DAS and must be seen in the context of plate 1, showing the area today without the barns. The application demonstrates continued pursuit by this farmer of sensitive management of his farmland environment, well summarised in the conclusion, section 5 of the DAS, and includes active encouragement of increased biodiversity within Little Copse itself. In a wider context, this farmer also carefully maintains areas of locally rare lowland meadow priority habitat, helped by a higher level stewardship status. The role of browsing animals in the maintenance of such habitats is well understood, and the national importance rare breed herd to be supported by the development is key to their ongoing management. The fundamental problem with objections raised to this development is that they rely entirely on alleged loss of historic woodland and ancient woodland indicators. The development loses no historic woodland, and the ancient woodland indicators are a feature of Little Copse as a whole. The ecological appraisal found no species of concern within the proposed development site. Photographs of the street scene on pages 9 to 12 and 30 indicate what would be lost from the rural appeal of the street scene if the suggested alternative site was implemented. The local community would object, and the loss of a large area of prime grazing land would be uneconomic in a farm struggling to be sustainable while maintaining high animal and environmental standards. The farmer seeks farm assured status to promote his high quality grass-fed produce. That's the end of the business.
Thank you, Mrs. Legg. Members, have we any questions of the Parish Council? Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll wait for...
I'll just ask for Mr. Leeson, if you come into the meeting, please. Good evening, Mr. Leeson. Welcome to the Western Area Planning Committee meeting. Thank you for your submission from your council. We do have a question from Councillor Vickers. Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Councillor Leeson. There was just one sentence in that quite long paragraph in the middle of your statement, which I didn't really understand. Perhaps you could clarify what it means. It ends with these three words, so woodland absence. What were you sort of meaning in that sense? It sort of reads as though there's a word missing or misspelt.
Yes, this was part of my efforts to get the thing under 500 words. You know, there's so many words to comment on, I'm afraid, that the editing sometimes went perhaps a little bit too far. Although an earlier version was, even I couldn't understand it. So it just means that if we add a few more words to that, the view in that photograph shows an absence of woodland. So there's no woodland in the site of the development.
Right. So what you mean is that there is no trees were destroyed in the making of this proposal, you might say.
Indeed, no. As I understand it, the woodland in that area, of course, the family currently farming it only moved in the year around 2000, 2001.
Yeah.
And there is a photograph of the area in 2001 in the design and access statement, I believe, showing no woodland in that area.
Yeah, yes, I think you've clarified it sufficiently. I think some of us may ask the applicant himself later on about.
Good idea. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. Councillor Abs, there's a question for you now, Councillor Leeson.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, John. It's to do with this business of ancient woodland. That's a very specific status and brings a lot of things to it. I think you argue that it isn't, but could you expand and convince me that it really isn't ancient woodland, please?
This, as you know, there's, for example, the magic map, which I can't remember which government department supports it, can be accessed, and it doesn't specify this like Reading's Copse is ancient woodland. It's got the particular shading on the magic map, and Little Copse is just woodland. I can't. There's 4 words in the phrase. I can't remember exactly what it is now, but it's not ancient woodland. Even the recent 25,000 to 1 Ordnance Survey map actually doesn't even mark it as woodland at all. But I think it's quite clearly not ancient woodland according to the standard definitions.
So are you promulgating that this is in fact woodland that has been created since around 2000, 2001 based on?
Oh, certainly, no. I think Little Copse has been around longer than that. How long it's been around, I don't know, but I think John Handy, who has a submission to be read out yet, is in a much better position to comment on that question.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. No more questions for Councillor Leeson. Councillor Leeson, thank you for your contribution this evening. I'll now ask Mr. Griffin to quietly usher you back into the waiting room so you can listen to the rest of the debate. And thank you for coming along this evening, representing Emborne Parish Council.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now move on, and Mrs. Legg, we have no submission from any objectors on this application, but we do have a submission from a supporter, and this is Mr. John Handy, I think. If you could read out the, thank you, that's what we want, the submission from the supporters on this application.
Okay. Is the supporters. Introduction. Working locally since 1984 and providing a woodland and arboricultural service, there are a few who have done more to sustain local trees and woodlands than myself. As such, I wouldn't be supporting this application if I considered any detriment would accrue to the trees and the important biodiversity of Little Copse. There have been misunderstandings in the assessment of this proposal, exacerbated by the paucity of site visits, and material considerations have been misinterpreted. The site. This small open area, once polluted, much excavated, made up ground, not a large area of woodland. Growth structure of the adjacent woodland trees demonstrates that this has not been woodland for many years. Proposal will not result in the loss of any existing woodland habitat. Woodland classification. The inventory of ancient woodland includes land continuously wooded since 1600. Little Copse is included on neither the rock map of 1761 nor on the inventory. Some other historic maps, including the Ordnance Survey, depict the area as scrub. The oak are not veteran trees, but by any recognised authority. In 100 years, they might be. The indicator species and features are not exclusive to ancient woodland. Little Copse is secondary woodland, insisting that the advanced protection rightly accorded to ancient woodland and veteran trees is misplaced. Potential harm to woodland habitat. Council documents uses phrases such as direct impact, loss of habitat, detrimental, etc. to both retained trees and the visible amenity. These assertions have not been explained or demonstrated. In contrast, the proposed damage mitigation within the application adheres to the recommendations in BS 5837, the Bible when it comes to building new trees. The proposals will not intrude into or affect the existing copse. The building and robust fencing will provide a permanent barrier outside the tree line between the cattle husbandry operation and the delicate woodland habitat for the future. The straw bedding system and internal drainage is designed to prevent seepage of any exudate. Extensive drainage in the yard using the natural gradient will prevent the likelihood of any external runoff towards the copse, all doing away with the need for a habitat buffer. As such, proposals fulfil NPPF 175. Significant harm is adequately mitigated. Visual amenity. The proposed barns are tucked at the back of the yard and will not diminish the visual benefits provided by the wooded skyline of Little Copse. Both alternative positions proposed by the council are further forward, with vastly greater impact on the skyline and thus the visual amenity of the local countryside. Additional native woodland and hedge planting is proposed, more than doubling the area of the site, screening the yard and interlinking the hedgerows, Little Copse and Reddings Copse. The green infrastructure will be enhanced, increasing biodiversity and increasing ecological corridors for fauna and migrating flora. Summary. These barns will have no undue impact on the existing habitat of Little Copse, have an imperceptible effect on the visual amenity nearby or more distant, result in net increase in native habitat, result in significantly more benefits to the countryside than potential disadvantages. That's the end of the representation, Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Legg. Members, do we have any questions? We do. Councillor Vickers. Therefore, I'll ask Mr. Griffin to invite John Handy into the meeting. Good evening, Mr. Handy. You're muted, sir. If you'd like to take your microphone on.
I think we're there.
You are there. Welcome to the Western Area Planning Committee meeting. Thank you for sparing your time this evening to give your response to your submission this evening. We do have some questions from you. The first one is from Councillor Tony Vickers. Councillor Vickers.
Oh, good evening, John. I have two questions for you. The first one refers to the drainage. In the elevations we've seen, the drainage does appear to be slightly sloping towards the woodland, but in your statement you say that the natural gradient will prevent the likelihood of external runoff towards the copse, doing away with the need for a habitat buffer. Could you explain how those two things seem to conflict, is my first question.
Yeah, the natural fall of the land is, including the paddock we've mentioned, one of the alternative sites too, coming across the site does tend to slope towards Little Copse. However, as you get onto the site, it then begins to fall away to the north. And if you can stand on site, and I gather you've been there, Tony, you can see that land very definitely does fall away towards the north of the copse.
Yes.
And then the drainage, the drains which are seen are visible on the, not so much the elevations, but on the plans. They are there. And I think in the early stages, the site levels indicate the same fall of the land away from the copse to the north.
So the drainage could be taken, as it were, sort of to the northeast rather than to the east where the woodland is.
Indeed.
Avoided from, yeah. So my second question, you described the site, small open area, once polluted, much excavated, made up ground. The officer's report indicates that they would rather let the woodland restore itself, if you like, return to the wildwood. I don't know whether you're qualified to comment on that. Perhaps it's more of a ecologist question, but would you think that the seed bank, which it's said is still in existence underneath that made up ground, would have much chance of recovering and restoring tree growth from seeds that are under it?
Mr. Handy, that wasn't part of your presentation. If you feel you're not qualified, you should say so, as opposed to what you think might happen. We have a tree officer here that can answer questions of qualification, as it were, of the officers. I just make that.
I'm quite happy to answer, Councillor Vickers. The seed bank, I mean, there's been a bit of a confusion between seed bank and seed bed, but it's seed bank. That is the residual old seeds left within the soil, which, when exposed to light, will then flourish. It happens I mean, and Mr. Giles will probably put me right on this, but basically two ways. One is when the soil is disturbed and seeds are exposed to light. And the other one is when the overhead canopy is removed, then seeds will then flourish. Now, what we have on that site is something which has been much excavated. So the seed layer and the seed bed, the layer of soil, the upper few inches of soil in which these seeds will reside, will have been disturbed and buried and probably destroyed. And that is after the damage which had been done by this slurry runoff during the dairying years up to about 1995, something like that. Seed species, tree species, the predominant ones we have there on site are oak, ash, birch, cherry. Those are the tree species as opposed to the understory of hazel and thorn and so forth, Guelder rose. And they send their seeds out and they germinate pretty well immediately. Ash takes a bit longer, but they germinate fairly immediately. And so they won't be in the seed bank. They won't be, if they're buried, they'll have rotted by now long since. You might get a few berry seeds in there, and I'm not qualified to say which ones of those might have survived. But I would like to point out that in the excavations which took place to put the pond in 20 years ago, the seed bank was turned over, the seed bed, and a new sort of seed bed was created. And we've seen what the result of that seed bank is. And it's this ruderal growth of grass, thistle, dock, bramble and so forth. So I think we have, the seed bed is actually, the seed bank, I beg your pardon, has demonstrated what it is. It's basically weed, not tree species. You might get some species coming in like birch, which is a pioneer species, taking advantage of the open light, but we haven't seen any of that there.
Thank you, Mr. Handy. Thank you, Councillor Vickers. Councillor Bennyworth.
Thank you, Chairman. Just really following on from that. Good evening, John, by the way. Very nice to see you. Just following on from that last statement from you. What damage do you think would have been done to the site also by slurry runoff historically?
Well, that's slightly outside my remit. I mean, I've seen it on farms, but I've never really taken much notice of the effects. I've worked on farms, including cattle farms, over the years, as a farm labourer and passing through farms and my forestry work. And looking on the internet, most of the runoff to do with slurry is to do with waterways, you know, streams and ditches and lakes and so forth. I did speak to an agronomist and asked him what his opinion was, and he said that over a period of time, the nutrient which does the damage to the soil will leach out, and some seeds will certainly survive that. And he wasn't able to give me chapter and verse on tree seeds and understory seeds, but he did stress that the best seeds to survive that were the oil-based seeds, and he cited oilseed rape and charlock and things like that. So I don't really know, but I don't think it would have done it any good.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed.
Councillor Cant.
My apologies, Chair. That question's just been answered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Handy, nice to see you again. Thank you very much for sparing your time to answer the questions of the committee. I'll ask Mr. Griffin now to invite you back into the waiting room. Thank you very much. We now come on to the submission from the applicant. This is Mr. Simon Tompkins. Mrs. Legg, could you read out the applicant's written submission to the committee, please?
Yes, Chairman. Here's the applicant's submission. I am the applicant and I farm the land subject to discussion this evening. Little Copse is not ancient woodland by definition or by designation. We have not removed any trees in order to facilitate the development. The much quoted 16 indicator species is taken from the 2004 TVERC survey of Little Copse. This is a single reference point upon which of this committee report is based. The same survey recommended that the site area be removed from the Wildlife Heritage Site designation, an important consideration. Plate 9 from the ecological appraisal is also important, but has been excluded from the CRP. The tree officer is the only consultee to have ever visited the site. This short visit was conducted in December, making it impossible for the officer to have verified the presence of or distribution of any summer flora indicator species. The officer's views as to the status of Little Copse are based on the indicator species sentence from 2004. The Forestry Commission clearly states that they do not comment on applications. The FC also never state that Little Copse is ancient woodland or refer to any indicator species being present. The closest ancient woodland to which they may be referring to in their guidance is Redding's Copse. In order to comply with WBCS 17, we have to ask if any potential site would be a reasonable location for the farms to be built. A plan and concise breakdown of the impacts of any potential sites was submitted. My neighbours are not farmers. Having a working livestock unit feeding 7 AM, 4 PM, November to April, 30 metres from their bedroom window would have a serious environmental health impact upon their lives. This fact alone would make the council's preferred site an unreasonable location. With regard to WBCS 18, the case officer has recommended refusal on the basis that the loss of 0.08 hectares of rank grassland, as described in 2004, would be an unacceptable loss of green infrastructure. By the same logic applied to the council's preferred site, the loss of a 0.35 hectare of semi-improved grassland in full view of the public domain would be even more unacceptable. In order to prepare the application, I've had to understand the planning policies. In writing the planning section of my design and access statement, I was able to literally copy the exact wording of the policies, such as the compliance with WCS 14 and 19 as a proposed site. The Apply these policies to the preferred site and ask any questions about whether or not it would protect the secluded nature of Bohms Lane, whether it conserves heritage assets in their settings, would it conserve the existing form and pattern? The answer is always no, so it is not a reasonable location. In recommending refusal, the council are hoping that we as private landowners leave the proposed site to re-wild over the next 50 years at the cost of our business, everything we have worked for and have dreamed of Bohms Farm someday becoming. The end of the presentation, Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Legg. Members, do we have any questions on Mr. Tompkins' submission? No, we don't. Yes, we do. Councillor Cole. Mr. Griffin, if you could ask Mr. Tompkins to come into the meeting, please. Good evening, Mr. Tompkins. Thank you very much for attending this evening and answering questions of the committee. We do have some questions for you. The first one is from Councillor James Cole.
Good evening, Mr. Tompkins. You tell us that you've not removed trees to facilitate this application, but the site's pretty much cleared. We understand the site was slurry damaged, and the 2004 survey that you refer to in your statement calls it rank grassland. Does that describe the state of it when your father took it on in 2001? Who was responsible for the slurry damage? And what do you think was the effect on whatever trees or undergrowth was there?
Well, firstly, you're talking about something that was almost 20 years ago. And at the time, I was still at college. So, you know, the answer, the best answer I can give you was provided by a qualified ecologist in 2004. They described the area as a pond area with a mown surrounds and rank grassland. Beyond that, you know, I can't speculate as to what previous occupants did with the site, and I don't think it would be appropriate for me to do so.
But it wasn't your father that caused the issue in the first place.
Yeah, I'm happy to say that.
We lost you there, Mr. Tompkins. If you could say.
Yeah, I'm happy to say it wasn't my father that caused the damage.
Fine, that's all I wanted to know.
Thank you. Have you another question, Mr. Cole?
I do have one or two more, because I quite like to know what happened to that site during Mr. Tompkins' father's and now his own stewardship. And I'd like to know from him in his own words.
I'll just remind you, this is a matter of clarification on the submission of the 500 words, not a historic run through of what's happened since the owner's been on the site. If we could just confine ourselves to that in all our questions, I'd very much appreciate it. Otherwise, it's slightly embarrassing sometimes for the attendee. We're asking questions that he hasn't prepared to divulge information to us to be questioned on, and two, it's against the protocol slightly. So if you could just concentrate on the 500 word submission, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly, Chairman. May I ask a question on the drainage? Because I quite like to know in his words why the drainage that is now proposed will protect Little Copse.
So I've submitted a drainage plan as part of the design and access statement. It's one of the appendices. And that drainage plan does show the existing levels of the site and the proposed levels of the site. If you look at that plan, you will see in conjunction with the elevations, which also actually do show that everything slopes away from Little Copse. So, I mean, really, unless gravity is going to reverse overnight, then water will always, or any liquid will always drain downhill. Now, in addition to that, we've also, before we put the application in, we spoke to an agricultural planning consultant and we said, look, we need to be 100% sure that we're complying with all the relevant regulations. And they've recommended, different from the previous application, that we add 2 slurry channels at the exit doors. that will lead into a separate effluent tank. And this is all shown on the drainage plan and the site plan to a degree. Just in case, you know, the roof caves in one day and a load of rain comes in and washes things through. We've really, what we've tried to do is a belt and braces approach. So there's no possibility of any kind of runoff into little copse.
Thank you.
Is that all? Thank you, Councillor Cole. It does seem to be you've turned your microphone off. We now come on to Councillor Hilary Cole. Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Chairman. I hope you won't disbar these questions, because I just a couple of things for Mr. Tompkins, please. Whilst I appreciate these issues before us tonight are really around the woodland and the site and how that is affected, can you tell me exactly why these barns are necessary and how many animals will be occupying them, and for how many months of the year?
Well, I suppose at the heart of things, I mean, it all goes down to our soil. We're a grassland farm. We can't suddenly start growing crops on the soil we're on. So we are a livestock farm. We've up to this point been keeping the small herd that we have in one of our other barns, which is a converted hay barn. For economic reasons, we really need to be maximising the value of our animals, and the best way to do this is to become farm assured. Now, in order to become farm assured, you obviously have to meet some incredibly high standards of welfare for the cattle. So there's two main reasons, I suppose. Then one would be that we need to provide the high welfare standards that we can't currently do with the current housing. And two, we need to be able to keep enough animals, a large enough herd, for it to be a viable enterprise.
So how many animals are we talking, Mr. Tompkins?
So how many animals are we talking? Well, we're looking to have 50 breeding cows, and then we keep our animals for 2 years after they're born. So we have 2 generations in addition to that. So we then have potentially 50 one-year-olds and 50 2-year-olds.
So 150 in total.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And it's necessary that these animals are contained in barns.
It's absolutely vital. Part of the repercussions of the refusal of the first application is that half our herd are now living outside, and we are finding out very much firsthand just how much damage they'll do to a wet field. If any of the councillors would like to see this, there is one of the fields they've already wrecked. You can walk across it on the public footpath down Wheatlands Lane, and you'll see exactly why it's important to keep animals inside, not just for their own benefit, but for the benefit of the wider landscape.
Okay. And my final question is the only reason for you not preferring, for you not being willing to consider site to the fact that it will affect your neighbours?
No, I mean, absolutely not. We submitted, we gave this a lot of thought when we sat down before we did the first application. We'd made the decision that, we're going to need these barns. And we said, right, well, where can they go? And we looked at the planning policies. We sought advice on the planning policies, and we measured them up against all the potential sites. In terms of how's it going to affect the character of the area? How's it going to have an effect on the historic landscape? How's it going to affect the public's enjoyment of the countryside? So by no means is that the sole reason. It was just one example that I felt I could fit in within the 500 words.
Thank you.
But there's some confusion about what we've actually submitted in that regard, in so much as the case officer's been framing it as we've submitted some alternative sites. We've never actually done that. We've submitted a potential sites appraisal where we're looking at whether or not sites are feasible locations.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Councillor Bennyworth, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Simon. Following on from Councillor Cole there, policy CS 14 requires efficient use of land. Can you tell us why Site 2 would be an inefficient use of your land?
Well, obviously the site we're proposing, it's part of it is already hard standing farmyard. It's a funny sort of triangle. So in looking at other potential sites, and I think I've illustrated it on the potential sites plan, anywhere else we put them, because of the wires or existing buildings or what have you, would require an extension of the farmyard, the entire area of the barns. So in that sense, it's inefficient because we're not using that little triangle of the farmyard for the proposed site with the other sites. So when I say in my potential sites appraisal that potential site 2 would take up 0.35 of a hectare, that's the area that would be required for accessing the site and moving around the barns and what have you. So in that sense, it's in my eyes, at least anyway, in my interpretation of things, is it's an inefficient use of land.
And a potential loss of a perfectly serviceable paddock, potentially.
So yeah, it's our quarantine area. Obviously if we've got a sick animal, we like to have it nearby because we need to keep a close eye on it. So that's where we generally isolate them. A couple of years ago, we had a fairly major outbreak of New Forest Eye, which is incredibly infectious. So we, as soon as you get one animal with that, you need to be able to put it somewhere a long way away from all the others, and that's what we use that paddock for.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank
you. Councillor James Cole.
May I ask one more question, Chairman? Simon, if you don't get this permission through tonight, what will you do?
I think, well, the main impact it will have on us is really, it'll put an end to our livestock enterprise. It's all very well, the plan is saying, oh, you could physically build the barns in this site that we're saying can be built, but in effect they're asking us, you imagine what it will be like for us living in our village if we build a couple of barns in that location. I told a chap who's lived down the road about it, and he nearly had a heart attack, and he's someone I considered a long-time friend. He certainly wouldn't be speaking to me. So in that sense, we wouldn't be able to keep the livestock. Beyond that, I suppose in agricultural terms, the only thing we could really do is perhaps expand the haymaking side of the business. But then, we're going to need more barns to do that. So they would have to go somewhere. We'd probably be able to get them under permitted development rights. Other implications
on that site, yeah.
It's it's not something I really want to think about at the moment, to be perfectly honest.
I don't blame you, but what you're saying is that the alternative of the second site up by the road is not practical. Is that correct?
It's not feasible in so many senses, yes.
Thank you. I think we'll draw a line there. Councillor Cole.
Thank you. Following on from what the other Councillor Cole has said, Mr. Tompkins, the more I hear about this, the more I'm wondering whether or not you've got enough land for your enterprise. Have you got enough pasture land for your enterprise, or are you trying to fit a quart into a pint pot here?
No, we're absolutely fine in that regard.
Thank
you know,
I think that's enough. It's not quite clarification. I let it run, of your submission, but the question's been asked, and I think you've answered it sufficiently. We've no more questions for you, Mr. Tompkins, but I will say I compliment you on the way that you articulately and precisely answered the questions. Not easy in a community like this of reasonably experienced planners to ask questions, some off-piste a little bit as to what your 500-word submission was, but I think you've done very well in answering those questions. And thank you very much for coming to the committee meeting this evening. I'll ask Mr. Hudson now to put you back into the waiting room so you can hear the rest of the debate. Thank you. Okay, members, we now move on to the ward member submission. And this is a presentation this evening by Councillor Claire Rolls, and I'll ask Mr. Griffin to invite Councillor Rolls into the meeting. Good evening, Councillor Rolls.
Good evening, Chairman.
I'll just get myself organised here because you, as you know, will have 5 minutes to make your presentation. I'm just trying to get my timer up.
I'm doing the same, Chairman.
Good. Well, you tell me when you're ready and we'll start. We're anxious to hear what you have to inform the committee on with this application this evening.
Great. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start by thanking those members who've actually made a site visit, which is so critical to understand both the development of the proposed sites and to fully understand why alternative sites identified are not realistic options. Members, much attention has been focused on the historical removal of trees on this site. This is not of the applicant's making. He did not cause the original damage. To quote the portfolio holder for planning, who has said on many occasions, "We are where we are." We need to move forward, and given that there is nothing worth keeping on the site, it's in a poor state and is already damaged, as we've heard, we need to look at the economic use of the land, particularly in a very challenging economic climate for farmers, with bovine TB, rural crime, COVID and Brexit looming. We need to also balance the benefits and advantages of the scheme with the disadvantages. Looking at the main reasons for refusal, the tree officer acknowledges that Little Copse is not designated as an ancient woodland and it is not listed on Natural England's ancient woodland inventory. He has, however, classified it as historic woodland, but there is no such legal definition. He talks about historic ash, and yet it's acknowledged that there will be a number of ash trees that will need to be felled fairly soon due to ash dieback. We've heard that the previous tenant dairy farmer let slurry leak over time and that it's caused damage to the seedbed. The current occupants dug a pond to solve a problem and filled it in when it was no longer needed. This will have caused further damage to the seedbed, as we've already heard. Regarding the impact on biodiversity, the applicant has proposed a drainage plan for existing and proposed levels of liquid, which highlights the overall slope and gradient away from Little Copse to the adjacent field. A much greater area of trees will also be planted, adding to the tree and hedge planting they have already done, creating alternate habitats and species to mitigate any potential loss in any event. There is an assumption that there are 2 alternative sites that could reasonably house the barns, as you've heard. Just to highlight that the existing site where the cattle are located at the moment is 2 miles away. 2 miles away is too far, and it's on the other side of the bypass and Reddings Cop, which is a true semi-natural ancient woodland. There are theoretically 2 sites next to Boehm's Farm, as you've seen. Officers claim these were put forward by the applicant as alternative sites, but I think you've heard that this is incorrect. The first site is directly in front of the Grade 2 listed farmhouse, which is simply unacceptable. The other site is a small paddock on the other side of the farm buildings, which has high voltage wires across it, restricting the area that can be used. This means moving the cattle sheds up towards a neighbouring house, which is, I understand, a non-designated heritage asset. Planning officers have also stated that the paddock is not used, but this is factually incorrect, as we've heard from the applicant. It's an isolation paddock, used when animals need to be isolated away from the road, away from others. It's also right by the road, as we've heard. I can't see either sites being supported by our heritage champion. Members, we need to weigh up the advantages and disadvantages of the scheme. In our current economic climate, we need to support local businesses more than ever. This application will help to safeguard the future of a rural enterprise and maintain jobs. It will secure the conservation of a rare breed of cattle, which is of national importance, and we should be proud of that locally. It is best practice for the safety and animal welfare for the cattle to be on site near humans in case an animal becomes sick or is calving. The cattle are themselves critical to continued maintenance and enhancement of rare grassland habitats on this farm, and grazing animals support a far more diverse range of insects and birds than redundant or mechanically managed grasslands.
1 minute.
The community will gain more trees, creating new habitats. The siting of the new trees between Little Copse and the Reddings will effectively create a wildlife corridor, and all young livestock will live under cover in the winter. In summary, I ask members to reject the officer's recommendation. This is not ancient or protected woodland. The current site is in a poor state and already damaged. The scheme will result in the planting of new trees, establishing a wildlife corridor, and reduce carbon emissions along the countryside roads of Embourne, as the applicant won't have to travel to tend to their cattle. Ultimately, this supports a local business and the economy at a critical, challenging time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rolls. Members, do we have any questions on Councillor Rolls' presentation to us? No, we don't. You've been let off, Councillor Rolls.
Thank you very much. Nice.
I'll ask Mr. Griffin to escort you back into the waiting room. Thank you. Members, I've lost Councillor Barnett. Councillor Barnett, are you with us just for, or has your internet gone down? We did hear, yes, he's back with us. Good, okay. You heard all that debate, Councillor Barnett?
Sorry, Chairman, I did actually have I was trying to put my electronic hand up to actually ask Councillor Rolls a question, but don't matter, you've moved on now. So I might make a comment in the debate anyway. Okay. Leave it.
I did notice your screen had gone down. That was the only thing. Thank you very much. Right, members, we now move on to any questions we have of our officers. We obviously have Mr. Masawa, who made the presentation, but I'll just remind you, we do have Mr. Giles, the tree officer, and we have Mr. Ryman, who is our ecologist. So if you have anything on trees or the undergrowth or other issues as a part to the building and the building position, if you'd raise your hand, which I can see we have some questions, and just indicate who you would like to address your question to. First one is Councillor Abbs, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The question is for Mr. Giles. Mr. Giles, is it or isn't it?
It is. Mr. Giles is tree office.
Yes. No. The question is it or isn't it ancient woodland?
That's good. Okay.
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. It's not classified as ancient woodland under the terminology. Ancient woodland is woodland which has been wooded since 1600, so for over 400 years. This woodland has been wooded, I suspect, for about 170 years because it's been shown on the OS 1943's map. So it's been a wooded area for 170 plus years, but it's not deemed ancient woodland.
So it's not ancient woodland. Okay.
No.
So the second thing is there any, given that ancient woodland has a minimum 15 meters around it, but this isn't, is there any parameter around which we should be taking consideration about the rest of the woodland in terms of letting it breathe? Similar to the 15-meter rule that you would have with well, it's not really 15, that's the minimum, isn't it? So anyway, any distance for the roots, etc., on what is not ancient woodland?
There is distance from the roots, but which has been shown in the arboricultural report by Mr. Handy. However, the barns are being sited in the woodland footprint, which is where the concern lies.
You're basically taking where the pond was by the looks of it. Yeah. So in terms of biodiversity gain, clearly we're getting more wood planted than we're losing. Do you have a percentage for me on gain?
I believe the new planting on the, I think it's the eastern side linking Little Copse and Reading Copse. I think it's double the size of what's what the proposed of the building is. In terms of net gain, I think Gareth is in a better position to answer that.
Okay, but as far as you're concerned, it's much greater than the 1.1 law that needs to be applied.
It's as far as I understand, 25 meters wide by about 50 meters long, which is the section between Little Copse and Reading Copse.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giles.
Councillor Abbs, I'm quite happy for you to address that question at this stage, if you would like, to Mr. Giles, as for continuity. Or are you happy with the answer you got?
I'm very happy with the answers I've had. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to ask two questions of Mr. Ryman, actually. One is the same question I asked Mr. Handy, basically about the seed bank. But the other question, I think, in a sense, is perhaps more important, because I think probably Mr. Handy's given us an answer to that, which Mr. Ryman probably broadly agrees with. But nevertheless, I'd like to hear his opinion. It's this comparison between the loss, quoting from Mr. Tompkins' statement, about the comparison between the loss of biodiversity, loss of ecological value from this site and from site 2, as it's called. I'm slightly always uncomfortable comparing one with the other, but there's been a lot of that, I think, from the case officer and from the applicant himself. But to my mind, what I've read in the Woodland Trust literature about grassland is that grassland is quite an important store of carbon. And if we're talking about an alternative site that will lose 0.35 hectares of grassland, now it may not be natural grassland because it's semi-improved, but I would have thought there's nevertheless quite a loss of carbon by developing that site, as well as a loss of biodiversity. So would Mr. Ryman like to comment on that if we're weighing two sites up in the balance?
Certainly. So the sward height at the moment, I would gather, depending on the stock grazing densities, isn't going to be very high at all.
But there's the soil under.
Sorry?
There's the soil underneath the actual grass I'm thinking of.
Yes, yeah, indeed.
Soil. But
woodland is obviously going to store far more than that grassland in particular, given the, I would imagine, fairly high stocking densities. Overall, you wouldn't expect that much carbon to be stored overall because of that.
But in the site we're looking at on this application, the woodland's already gone. The soil is already distributed. I should imagine much of the carbon has already been released with all the disturbance that we've had. Would that be true?
I wouldn't be in a position to comment on that. What I would say is locating there is going to cause leaching into the woodland of nitrogen from the proposed area, whereas site 2 is going to cause less leaching into the woodland because of the pure distance between the proposed areas where the cattle are going to be stored and the woodland. And the leaching and excessive eutrophication of the woodland will lead to biodiversity loss in the woodland.
That's on the assumption that there isn't adequate drainage, isn't it?
Indeed. And before this evening, I was making my assumptions that it was only 50 cattle, were not 150. The tank that has been used at 6,000 litres, now to visualise that for everyone, that is 6 metres by 1 metre by 1 metre in cube to look after the effluent of 150 cattle. Yeah, it doesn't seem enough to me, ultimately. If there's and there's a real risk of a pollution event there, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Ryman. I'll think about that. Preferably not jump into it, though.
Well, I think it's worth considering here, because we have been told there's 150. This assumption of the ecologist is at 50. So, just for clarity, is this tank, or is this tank as it stands large enough or not? And you did then say that there could be an issue of leaching. Now, I was going to say whether it's aerial leaching or whether it's surface leaching, but this has put another figure into the equation. I think we could do with some clarity. If it is 150 cattle, and they are going to be in this shed or these sheds. I mean, it might be a condition we need a bigger tank. I don't know. If we go that way, it just gives an option at this stage. Is we ask questions of clarification, and this will be a question I think we ought to take into consideration at this stage. You are muted, Mr. Ryman.
A bigger tank would be one thing that would help, certainly, but you're still going to be very close to the woodland itself. So you would still expect that not all of the effluent is going to be caught. Also, as well as the liquid and solid effluent you would expect, there is the question of methane being produced by the cattle, which it doesn't travel very far. And there's research done by Forest Research, the research arm of the Forestry Commission, done in 2004, looking at eutrophication of terrestrial habitats. And this is likely to be the sort of thing that would happen here.
Thank you. Hence my question.
When compared to Site 2.
Hence my question whether you were considering aerial methane contamination or surface. And have you addressed methane in any detail in your report to give to us?
No, I didn't.
Thank
Sorry.
you. Thank you. Councillor Cole, Hilary.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got some questions. I think it's for Mr. Masiwa, really. The first one is, can we have some clarification about these alternative sites? They're listed in the agenda. The applicant is saying that they haven't put these sites forward. What is the position if we said we don't like, if the committee said we don't like the site that's proposed, but we prefer site 2? Would that mean another application or not? I'm unclear. The water seems to be muddied between what site, the proposed site, and an alternative one.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Just to give a background on the alternative sites, as indicated in my presentation, we had an application which we determined in August. Prior to the determination of that application, we indicated to the applicant that there are objections on the siting within the site that you're considering tonight. So we invited the applicant to consider alternative sites. And they produced those two sites, one which is opposite the farmhouse and the site 2. We had a consideration as officers along with the team leader, and we concluded that on balance, considering the impacts that the applicant has indicated tonight on the site 2, that would be less impactful in the overall picture. So that was our consideration at that time. We also extended to the applicant to amend the red line to include site 2, which is what would happen normally, and we extend the determination in order to consider that as a new proposal or new location. But before you today, you're considering the site which is near the woodland. In that respect, if they wanted to amend it, it's something that members would need to obviously discuss. But within the application, there is scope to amend the red line onto site 2, if required, without a new application. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. I have another
Yes.
questions, Chairman, for
Certainly. Yes, certainly.
We have taken a decision, a planning policy decision, to in the current climate, to give more weight to the economic aspects of planning applications as opposed to social and environmental. I see no mention of that weight in the application. Has sufficient weight been given to the economic aspect of this application, bearing in mind that it's a positive message that has been given to planners from the policy team?
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Yes, officers have given weight to the economic benefits of the proposal, as alluded to earlier. We acknowledge and support the need, which is identified and justified. So we haven't disputed that. And this goes back to our invitation to the applicant to consider an alternative site, and also an opportunity to amend the proposal utilizing an alternative site. Because yes, we put weight on the economic benefits of the proposal. In terms of the balance, again, as officers, we've had to weigh up, yes, there are economic benefits, but also there are environmental sort of impacts and social impacts in terms of amenity provided by the woodland in terms of the landscape. So considering all of those points, we arrived at the refusal recommendation.
Thank you. And one final question, if you don't mind, Chairman. We do have an animal welfare officer in the local authority, and I'm rather surprised to see in the papers that the animal welfare officer hasn't been consulted. Can you explain why not? Because I would have thought his views on the siting of these barns would have been quite valuable with regard to the welfare of the animals.
Thank you, Councillor. We didn't consider that animal welfare was a significant consideration in this respect. As indicated in the presentation, we acknowledge that the current arrangements for the farmer in terms of the 2-mile round trip is inadequate. This has gone into, as I said earlier, our extension in terms of looking at alternatives, in terms of supporting the farmer in providing the buildings. So we didn't think that the animal welfare consideration was something that we were sort of concerned about, essentially.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Councillor Bennyworth.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think this is a question to either Mr. Giles or Mr. Ryman. Mr. Ryman, you can find it out amongst yourselves. We learned this evening the Thames Valley Environmental Records Centre conducted a survey in 2004, suggesting that this area could be removed from the local wildlife site list. Could you comment on that, please?
Giles, shall I go? Okay. So it could well be, but also at the same time, there inherently, if the site was left to go wild, there would be succession in that area as well over time. And in the last 2 years, the changes that have happened in that area, if they hadn't have happened, there would be further succession through that ecological succession, that is. And therefore, those edge habitats in some ways provide extra value in terms of the value to the woodland in terms of biodiversity overall. So yes, it could have been removed, but at the same time, there is value in that redundant vegetation. And if the ash tree had been left as well, there would have been value in having it as dead standing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Happy, thank you, thank you, Councillor Benningworth. Councillor Cant.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarity for me, really, to start with from Gareth. To what extent is I've never come across before, despite serving on other planning committees in other places, but to what extent is the consideration of the operational facilities, such as slurry storage tanks, part of the planning judgment? I mean, I'm just getting clear in my mind whether that's something on which you legitimately comment, or whether it's not actually part of the planning process. I mean, you can observe something, but is it something you are asked to reflect on, whether those storage facilities are habitually
We've had
okay?
cases where, for instance, up near the Lambourne Valley, where there have been sewage treatment plants needed to protect the triple SI and the SAC there. Now, there are similar eutrophication problems that could happen here that would affect biodiversity negatively.
Sorry, forgive me, Gareth, that's not the point I'm getting to. I understand the point you made earlier, but what I'm trying to hear about is, do you make a judgment about the operational proposal by the landowner, by the entrepreneur who's doing this, by the farmer? Do you make a judgment about whether those operational facilities they propose are adequate to deal with the issue you're concerned about? Or is it just a concern you express? I mean, judgment as to whether the tank's big enough or small enough in relation to the cattle or not.
Mr. Owen, you may think that Mr. Till might answer this, or Mr. Masiwa. What you're saying is it a planning issue? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wonder if it's a planning issue, simple as that. Is it something I should consider or not?
A planning issue. Can we get some direction, I think, from Mr. Masiwa?
Yes. Do you want to answer, Simon? Okay. Yes, Councillor Kant. I think the consideration in terms of drainage, how slurry will be managed and things like that would be something that we would consider. Certainly, this has been one of the main key considerations in this application and the one before, in terms of the mitigation that has been put forward as being required for the development to mitigate against those accidents that have been talked about tonight. I mean, in terms of the development as proposed, it is identified in planning terms that intensive livestock development, in some cases, can be having a lot of or a high level of environmental impact. In some cases, you do have to provide an environmental impact statement with your proposal, so it is definitely a planning consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Masiwa. Then, if a very brief supplementary, it could be a one-word answer. In the enormous range of various reasons the planning officer has given for not granting this, what would you say in your judgment was the single most important feature of refusal? If you asked to rank them and take the number one, what's number one? I found difficulty distinguishing what's your lead objection.
Thank you, Councillor Kant. The objections are in terms of twofold. In terms of the location of the barns in a part which is considered still part of the woodland, and the second part is would be the key point to answer your question, is the impact on the rest of the woodland that will be retained in terms of the operational function of the building going forward. I think that would be the key considerations, which I pick out from both the tree officer's objection as well as the biodiversity
Thank you.
objection.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that.
Mr. Masiwa, following that explanation of yours, I'm sure all our decisions, most of our decisions, unless there's extenuating circumstances, are done on policy, and I'm sure you can relate those two issues to a West Berks Council policy, can you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, in terms of the ecological refusal reason, it's policy CS17, biodiversity and geodiversity of the core strategy, as well as in terms of the tree reasons for refusal, it's policies CS18, which is green infrastructure, which protects woodlands, and policy CS19, which is the historic landscape character. And that comes in terms of the character of the woodland within the landscape. Obviously, it's not built on, it's a wooded sort of character, and that would be altered by the bans in that location.
Thank you. That gives a bit more support, I think, to Councillor Cant's question. Councillor Abbs.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think this is, I'm not sure who the question is for, maybe yourself, Mr. Masawi. When I look at an ordnance survey map, it basically puts Hill Farm and Bones Farm at 122 metres, and it puts the copse that we're talking at 115. And whilst I'm willing to accept that on an on-site visit will show that, in fact, the water now would flow from the primary site, the alternate site, the proposed 2 site, I don't see any evidence and any study of which way things would flow. And if I'm going from 122 to 115, surely it's just then going to all fall into the copse. Could you clarify for me, please, why this second site is more viable than the first site?
Thank you, Councillor Abbs. Yes, when we considered the previous application, when we invited the applicant to submit the alternative sites, we considered them in consultation with the tree officer and the ecologist, and they both were content that there would be sufficient distance. I think the ecologist has indicated in his presentation as well, for the ditches that is recommended in his consultation comments to be secured around the barns on site 2 to further protect sort of surrounding environments. So just to add on to that, if site 2 was chosen as the alternative location, there will still need to be mitigation to protect the rest of the environment from the barns and the activities associated with the cattle. From that location, the ecologist and the tree officers have both said there is sufficient sort of distance to the woodland to insert those mitigation requirements.
But do I conclude this? There might be more distance to do it, but there is significantly more mitigation required. Unfortunately, because we haven't had a site visit, and even if I had visited the site, I wouldn't have looked at the alternate site too, because it wouldn't have come through in time. I'm now very unclear as to exactly the landscape I'm looking at and how much mitigation, and I don't see that in the information before me. So I'm seeking some clarity on just how this can be with so much additional mitigation, and considering we've just looked at the current mitigation is not being acceptable with a 6 by 1 meter tank. How am I supposed to draw a clear conclusion this evening?
Maybe the ecologist might answer that. His comments, consultation comments, do address what is required in terms of mitigation. I think it mentions a ditch around the boundaries of the barn, and a 7 meter buffer to any of the trees. So it has been addressed. I don't know if you want to expand on that, Gareth or Andrew.
Certainly, I'll expand on that unless Andrew wants to.
No, we'll take you, Mr. Ryman.
Okay. So In my original consultation response, I did say that there would need to be a 5 metre buffer and a 2 metre ditch protecting the woodland. Now, additionally, I would say that there seems to be areas within Site 2 option that could be utilised as SUDs as well, and potentially offer some on-site grazing as well for any quarantined animals, potentially. It's entirely possible. It looks from looking at that. So there, in my opinion, that makes a far better choice of place to put it. Additionally, there would need to be monitoring surveys as well to make sure that the effluent isn't entering the woodland.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abbs. Councillor Cole, Hillary, please.
Thank you. I just have one other question, really. Mr. Ryman expressed surprise earlier on that with regard to the number of cattle, which and the tank size, and this ties in really with Councillor Camps and Councillor Abbs's questions. If we were minded to approve this application, can we condition a bigger tank to cope with the effluent from 150 cattle and other mitigation measures? Or would we have to defer this application in order to consider that?
Chairman, if I can answer that question. My view on this is that there is no guarantee that within the red line that is currently proposed, that there would be adequate space to condition the mitigation measures required and the adequate tank size in order to service the site of the building as proposed. But there may be, as has been suggested earlier, the potential for amendment of the red line in consideration of further details. And there is the potential for officers to explore the provision of additional measures on the land. So if members were minded to recommend approval subject to those details being secured by officers following the committee's resolution within a suitable amount of time, say 3 months, then I believe that it would be possible for those options to be explored with a view to bringing the application back to committee if no resolution could be found to those matters.
Thank you, Mr. Tyrrell. That's very useful. Councillor James Cole.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a bit confused by this reference to 50 cows being surprising. My information is that the design statement actually covered this, that it is not news to planners. So I'd like clarification of this. I'm informed.
I don't think it was news to planners. I think it was a news. It was something that Councillor Cole had picked up, wasn't it? Or one of the members picked up 50 estate.
Planners seem to no. I correct. I think Mr. Ryman was surprised to find that it wasn't 25, but 50. Now, my information is.
You said it was 50.
But it is 50. It always has been a 50. 51-year-olds, 50 cows, 50 tiny calves, and 1 bull.
That's 150 altogether.
151, actually.
So it's the difference between having 150 and 50 that's the speculation that doesn't add up. It just the tank size isn't going to be sufficient.
Right, let's just stop there.
Been raised
let's just, Councillor Cole, just stop there. Some clarification. Where did the 50 come from in the first place that you assessed that the tank was acceptable? And now at this meeting, we found it's 150 and it's not acceptable. What number did you work on and where did that number come from? I think that's what Councillor Cole is saying.
That comes from the design and access statement, 50.
So the 150 tonight is new information.
Indeed, from the applicant, from Simon.
Thank you. Councillor Cole, would you like to come back now? Sorry.
I'm still confused.
Well, so am I. I'm just hoping that that explanation from Mr. Ryman was enough to say that the application came in with 50. I mean, you as a farmer might say, if you're going to put 2 barns up, seems excessive for 50 cattle, but I don't know. That's not my...
It is partly my area of expertise. I was brought up on a dairy farm. I've worked on a cattle farm. This is not new to me. In any such enterprise, you always have this sort of enterprise. You'll have full-grown cows, you'll have yearlings, what's referred to as 1-year-old, and you'll have calves. This one also has a bull. It's obviously intending to breed. So that's perfectly normal. It's what I would expect to hear.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to determine here, and I'm sure all the members are slightly confused as well, the difference between 50 and 150. And the issue that I brought up was that Mr. Ryman considered the tank wasn't big enough. If it's 150, he'd done his assessment on 50 cattle.
Can I just point everybody to 6.8 on page 57? That seems to be the information that everyone's looking for.
Thank you, Mrs. Mayor. Maybe you could read it out for us.
Yes, certainly. 6.8. It says the submitted documents outline that the herd is currently composed of 24 breeding cows with associated young stock. The aim is to have up to 50 cows with associated young stock. The existing herd is housed in the winter in a converted hay barn, and it talks of what's happening now.
That's where the 50 came from.
It seems to be 50 plus young and 24 plus young. That's what's in the officer's report. The principal development.
So what does that summate to?
That makes, it should be around about 75 now, 25 plus 25 plus 25. And they want to double up to 50 plus 50 plus 50.
Which makes 150, which is the number we got to, which is straightforward.
Yeah, well, that's
okay.
What it always has been.
Yeah. Okay. I have all hands down now. Any more questions of the officers? That seems to have been concluded. Members, we now come on to the debate. We've got a lot of information to consider there this evening from our officers, from our attendees, and Councillor Cant would like to start the debate. Thank you, Councillor Cant.
Thank you, Chair. Well, unaccustomed as I am to working against the recommendations of officers, and as usually they've done a very thorough, meticulous job, it feels like a bit of storm in a cowshed to me. As far as I can see it, we've got a thriving young farming entrepreneur who will be desperately required as we go forward into a new era next year, who is capable, by my calculation, of accommodating up to 450 cattle on his 230 acres of grassland, who has a genuine operational need for what will be quite a big investment, I guess, into facilities to make his farm more profitable and more productive and better. And in this, I was balancing the fact that normally, if the officers have a number of reservations about an application, is what is there to counter that? And as far as I can see it, there's a very strong feeling that the community would benefit more substantively from the barns being in the location that's proposed, and that despite the reservations of the planning officers, to me that and the economic and practical needs of the farmer in this case would make me feel that that we should grant this application. I'll be strongly for it. I propose we grant the application.
Thank you. I move on now to Councillor Abbs.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, initially I was tending towards opposing this application based on the grounds that we were destroying ancient woodland, and that's a real no-no for me. However, I think now, having fully established that it isn't, that the area that is being discussed, which will absolutely require some felling of something, because unless all the photographs are wrong that I'm looking at, certainly in 2018 there was trees in the area that that now need to be cut down, and even if not, it's there's, you know, we're looking at biodiversity gain here, which is pretty significant, I think, compared with the loss. I have real issue with proposed site or the preferred site of the planners. I just don't see enough evidence that that is a better alternative than what the applicant has gone for. So I think I've come round to actually, and I will quite happily second Councillor Kant's proposal.
Some consideration of conditions, members, you might think or might not need to be addressed before we get to any further down the process. Let me put it that way, not going too fine a point on it. Councillor Vickers, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, Councillor Culver is probably the nearest to a qualified member of this committee, but maybe she's vegetarian, doesn't want to get into a debate about beef production. I mean, I feel slightly guilty when I eat beef, and I don't often do it. But to be honest, one's got to set that aside. We're a long way from being
a planning issue, Councillor Vickers.
And that's not a planning matter, I'm sure. But I see so many positives in what this enterprising young farmer is doing, and there are few enough young farmers around, for goodness sake. This farmer was lucky enough to inherit a farm, I guess. So, I mean, it's very unusual that we're almost asked in this application to choose between site A and site B. Now, site 2, as it's actually called, I think has significant disadvantages. The landscape impact, the environmental health impact on a neighbour, it is far more intrusive, both from the lane and from almost every direction. Whereas with the screening hedge, I think this barn and with the backdrop of little copse from the direction which is most skylined from, which is the north, I think this will have an almost negligible impact on the landscape. And sadly, any bit of wood that was there is gone. So I don't really see it's got impact on the immediate next door bit of woodland. So I'm very pleased that colleagues seem to be moving towards the direction that after my site visit, because I was very finely balanced before I went to see the site, found I couldn't actually access it because you couldn't see it from the road. So that's when, I was quite pleased that there was almost an invitation to see it, but we won't go there. We are where we are. And I think without visiting the site, hearing what colleagues have said, I would certainly support an application to approve. And clearly the drainage condition needs to be looked at very closely. And there will be quite a lot in the landscaping in order to achieve the necessary mitigation. But I think on balance, we will end up with an all-round positive situation here if we approve this.
Thank you. Councillor James Cole.
Thank you, Chairman. I had a lot of things to say and I'm not going to bother.
Good.
But I would like to say something, Chairman, before you actually shut me up in time.
You offered to be quiet for once. I thought I'd take the opportunity to move on.
Not just yet.
Okay.
But I won't do what I was going to do. It was me who called this thing in, and I did not want to be accused of being predetermined on this thing, so I have been typing away furiously in case I did need to summarise it. I'm disappointed in particular that planners don't seem to give a damn about animal welfare. But I'm really disappointed by that. This application offers a really neat wildlife corridor all the way down the proposed new hedge through Little Copse, proposed new planting to Reddings Copse. The gaps between the bits are not enough to not call it a wildlife corridor. I think that's really helpful. I think the alternative sites, as has been alluded to already, I would have been objecting heavily to alternative site 1 and nearly as heavily to alternative site 2 simply because of a different hat. But locally, alternative site 2 is awful. To bring the noise and the smells and whatever of a cattle barn, which I'm afraid I really do understand, I was brought up with them, to bring that up practically to roadside is a bit silly, really. And, if we were to say, well, they're going to rewild the old site, aren't they? the site that we won't let them have, the state that that site is in, where it's near as, well, it's almost a brownfield site. That's not going to happen. We would not get what we would like to see if we did expect it to be rewilded. It just won't happen. Whereas to turn it into a couple of barns makes very good sense. Shall I stop there, Chairman?
Thank you, very much appreciated, and thank you very much for your observations. Members, I direct you back to conditions, and I am concerned that we've asked now that drainage from Councillor Vickers should be addressed. We've taken advice from Councillor Till, from Simon Till, our planning officer, that should this tank not be big enough, it might not be able to be accommodated in the red line. So are we looking at a condition that drainage will be looked at, the tank will be reassessed, and there will be consideration of moving the red line in a process that's acceptable, whether or not it's a reapplication or whether it can be done as a continuation of this application? Are we happy with that as a condition? I say that because otherwise Mrs. Mayor will pull me up after we go to a vote, should it be, and we start trying to add conditions, and she'll remind me and say, you've done your bit. Are we happy with the conditions all round? We've considered the methane considerations as well, not forgetting how close it is to the wood. Is there anything we can do about that? We've done surface, we've done tankage. We've not considered how often these tanks should be cleared out. Is that a planning issue? We'll be advised on that again. But these are the issues here. We've decided now we're happy to put it where it's going to go. Now we've got to look at the, I think, as Mr. Massawi has said, of the operational considerations of the smell, which Councillor Cole has said has moved away from the road. We're happy with that. We've just got considerations of methane with the trees and tank size and red line. Would somebody like to maybe tie that up? I see Councillor Hilary Cole is next. Maybe she'd like to bundle that up as a proposal. I don't like to direct the committee. That's not my job to do, but I just, there are little areas sometimes when you're in debate, you get your, I've used this, you'll have to forgive me, you get your nose so far in the trough that sometimes we don't see the bigger picture or we just miss bits out, and I just try to redirect you. Councillor Cole.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. You are rather assuming that I'm supporting this application. So you're sort of predetermining me. And I really feel that if it is bundled up, then that would be down to Councillor Cant, who made the initial proposal to agree to the statements that you have made, Chairman.
Thank you. The only reason I say that was because you brought the tank up after I suggested it, which I was very, very grateful for.
And having said all that, Chairman, as this committee well knows, I don't often vote against planners and officers' recommendations. I can't help feeling that this one, there's a bit of straw clutching going on by planners with regard to reasons for refusal, which are a bit sort of weak. The area, looking at the photographs, I haven't done the site visit, but looking at the photographs, the area looks a bit of a scrubby land, that will benefit from some sort of regeneration. And quite frankly, I can't see the benefits of the alternative sites. So as long as we get, my biggest concern is with regard to the tank size and the mitigation of the harm of any drainage from the operation into the woodland. If that can be mitigated, then I think we're on fairly weak ground here, Chairman, in refusing it. And I don't honestly feel that sufficient weight is being given to the economic aspect of this proposal. And I think we do need to be mindful in these times that we have to make the economic aspect the primary factor in determining planning applications, as planners have been directed by planning policy members.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Councillor Cole, I didn't for a minute think that you predetermined this, but I was getting down the Zoom line a warm feeling. Okay, I'm going to ask now, Councillor Bennyworth, you anything to add without duplication?
Just slightly, yeah. I think this is far better use. The site, we're looking at efficiency. This is a far more efficient use of a site that's quite frankly not going to return to a woodland anytime soon. It's being used to store farm machinery. It'll be continued to be used to store farm machinery unless it can be put to better use, which I think this is a far better use. And coming back to matters drainage-wise, I mean, we're talking, the farmer's a very responsible man who husbands his land very responsibly and is passionate about matters environmental. This isn't a dairy farm. We're not talking about slurry and washing down milking parlours and the like. This will be winter storage where cattle will be stored for 5-6 months over the darker months. They'll be layered down with straw and that'll be cleared out at the end of the winter. It's not going to be causing as much as I fear officers are worried about.
Thank you. Councillor Barnett, my apologies, I've missed your hand.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've come in at the end of the debate, and clearly it's been a comprehensive debate, and I don't want to prolong it. And many of the points I was going to make have already been made, but I will make two observations quickly. I am saddened, obviously, I couldn't go to the site under the present circumstances. I do know the area from my youth extremely well, but not that particular site. But I am a little bit confused tonight in relationship to what trees are there and what aren't there and what's been taken away, because that was a little bit confusing to me during some of the questioning. So all I would say is that normally we listen to the debate and we make a judgment on the evidence that's been put forward, and some of the evidence tonight to me has been a little bit confusing, but I'm fully supportive, and it's more on welfare grounds than anything else. Look, I'm actually very much in favour of it.
Thank you, Councillor. And finally, I'm going to call on Councillor Cant, hopefully to, in a comprehensive way, bundle up our conditions. Councillor Cant.
Well, hopefully, Chair, in a very brief way, so that our own tanks don't become totally filled with slurry on the committee. Can I just propose that we approve this application subject to an appropriate condition on drainage, which I think, seeing Simon's head bent over for the last few minutes earnestly over his desk, he may already have prepared, subject to some wording of a condition to cover drainage.
Thank you. Mr. Tilt, can you advise us how you captured that, please? And Mr. Mayor, whether you're happy with what we are going to propose. Mr. Till or Mr. Selby, whichever is drafted a roundup of our suggested conditions on the tank, accommodating it, and any issues on redirecting or amending the red line, and maybe whether there ought to be something looking at aerial discharge. I don't know.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that in the circumstances, I would suggest the following conditions. Materials as per the drawings, landscaping scheme to be provided and agreed, a mitigation strategy for ecology, and in respect of drainage, I would suggest that officers are allowed 3 months to negotiate an acceptable scheme of drainage measures with the applicant. And subject to that being done, the application is approved. If that can't be agreed with officers in that 3 months, or such an alternative timescale as agreed with you, Mr. Chairman, then the application will need to come back to committee for members to consider what has happened with those negotiations.
Thank you. Members, if you're against any of that, could you put your hand up? Just otherwise I'll assume everybody's happy with that resolution from Mr. Till. Yeah, that's good. Okay, therefore it's time, I think, to put this to the vote, and we do have a proposer, Councillor Cant, and that is seconded by Councillor Abbs. For the recommendation of Headed Planning and Countryside be authorised to grant permission for this application 20/02324 full at Bones Farm for the erection of these 2 sheds for housing cattle. I'll ask Mrs. Mayor if she'd be very kind enough to conduct the name vote.
Thank you. Councillor Abbs.
For.
Councillor Barnett.
For.
Councillor Benworth.
For.
Councillor Cant.
For.
Councillor H. Cole.
For.
Councillor J. Cole.
For.
Councillor Culver.
Against.
Councillor Hooker.
For.
Councillor Vickers.
For.
Yeah, carried 8-1.
Thank you, Mrs. Mayor. Therefore, this application is approved. Members, thank you very much indeed. I don't think we have any a report on appeals, do we, Mr. Till? Nothing at all.
We do not,
tonight?
Chairman.
Okay, well, again, members, thank you very much for your contribution tonight. If I don't see you before Christmas, it's only 2 weeks away. I wish you all a very happy Christmas. Our next meeting, I think, is the 13th of January, and I look forward to seeing you all again in this this wonderful gathering. I say good night to you all, and as Eddie Waring would say, it's time for an early bath, I think, at 8:30. We've done very well.